All right, 2 Kings chapter 4, let's call this one Ninja, because there's an interesting story from my time in college that I think sums up this chapter that talks about Elisha and his ability to help. Three different sets of folks in this chapter. Two sets of women, one a widow and the other one who seems to be an older married woman. And in the last story, he's going to help the sons of the prophets, which ties back into the first story because the widow is the widow of one of the sons of the prophets, who is now in debt, and her two sons are at risk of being taken by their creditors because in this period of Israel's history, debt servitude was a way that they could satisfy unpaid debts, and that's exactly what she had. And so when she comes to Elisha, she seems to be in a panic, and he is going to ask her a simple question. After asking, "What can I do for you?" he's going to ask her, "What do you have?" And I've heard this exceptionally well preached by another minister who helped me to realize that the solution to many of our problems starts with what we have on hand, even though our first temptation can be to look around and try to find a miraculous solution to the things that puzzle us. But in this circumstance, the fact that she's going to get a miraculous solution starts with what she has on hand, because she is going to say, "All I have in the house is a little bit of oil." He's going to tell her, "Go borrow some pots because you're going to need them." And so what's going to happen is something that's similar to some of the miracles we see in Jesus' ministry, where just a little bit of bread feeds a lot of folks. And in this particular circumstance, much like Elijah was able to help the widow and her son endure the drought, meaning that their bread was not going to run out. Now Elisha is going to do that for this widow who is in debt, meaning that all of the containers that she can borrow from her neighbors, she is going to need to fill with the oil that's not going to run out in her house until the containers that she's borrowed run out. And he is going to say, "Good, now that you have all that oil, sell it. Not only are you going to be able to pay off your debts, you're going to be able to live off of the excess." And so that's what he does for the widow of one of the sons of the prophets. He is next going to find himself actually being the beneficiary of some hospitality and some kindness when a Shunammite woman and her husband are going to consistently take he and Gehazi, his servant, in and feed them on their journeys as they pass by. They're going to seem to pass by so much that she is actually going to have a room prepared for them at her house for them to actually stay at during their travels, which is going to prompt them to say, "Well, what kind of kindness can we show to her since she's been so kind to us?" And Gehazi is going to say, "Well, her husband is old and she has no child. What do you think?" Which is going to prompt Elijah to call the woman in to say, "You're going to have a kid," which is in turn going to prompt her to say, "Please don't," because she doesn't want to get her hopes up only to be disappointed. And she's not going to be disappointed because she is going to have a kid, but she is going to be disappointed when that child dies not too long afterward. And so it is going to be very similar to what we saw with Elijah and the widow of Zarephath, when Elisha is going to be in a situation where what seemed to be an act of kindness is quickly going to turn into disappointment and tragedy for this family. And so as this widow goes to find Elisha, she's basically going to keep her grief to herself, because her husband's going to be like, "Why are you looking for Elisha?" She's going to simply say, "All is well." And this is a point that we have emphasized before, understanding that in her example, we get to see someone who, under tremendous grief, holds it together long enough to continue seeking out solutions. So she doesn't even tell her husband what's happened to the son. She simply has someone get the transportation ready so that she can get to Elijah to make sure that this thing isn't final, and it's not. But before she finds that out, she is going to let her grief out. And Elisha is going to be surprised, because as he sees her coming, he is going to send Gehazi out, and she is likewise going to tell him all is well, until she gets to Elisha and she collapses and lets it all out, which is also going to strike Elisha as unusual, because God hasn't even let him know that she was grieving to this degree. And so as she lets them know what's going on, he's going to send Gehazi ahead with his staff. He's going to tell him to lay the staff on the boy, but Gehazi's going to come back as they're in transit. He's going to say it didn't work. And so as Elisha continues, he's going to actually make it to the boy, and he is going to revive him once again, like Elijah, taking what seems to be a cruel turn of events and actually turning them into relief. Understanding that at the end of the chapter, we're going to see him back in the company of the sons of the prophets, and understanding that this is a time of famine, he is going to want to be a good host. And so he is going to tell his servant to put a pot on for them. And as one of them is gathering some extra herbs for the stew, they're going to throw some in that are actually going to seem to be poisonous. And so as they're eating, they're going to say, "Oh, man of God, there is death in the pot." At which point he's going to tell someone to bring him some flour. Seems like Elijah is going to be the one to take the flour and throw it into the pot, at which point he's going to say, "Keep eating." And all is going to be well. Understanding that story reminded me of a story back from college when I got to see one of the guys on the football team arguing with one of the guys on the rugby team. The guy on the rugby team basically giving them grief for having to wear pads in their contact sport. To which the guy on the football team responded that, "Look, to any ordinary fool, hands and feet are for walking, but to a ninja, they're weapons." So everybody got to have a good roll on the floor laughing moment at that response to settle that part of that ongoing argument between two friends, giving each other grief over whose sport was tougher. But it reminded me that we are looking at Elisha, a man who has already healed the waters of Jericho by simply taking some salt and throwing salt into the tainted waters. Now we're looking at Elisha possibly being the one who's taken just some flour and throwing it into a poison pot of food, turning it into something that could provide food during a time of famine. And later on, we're going to see a young man who is trying to build a residence for the sons of the prophets lose an axe head. And once again, Elisha is going to step in, this time taking nothing more than a stick and throwing it into the part of the waters where the axe head fell, which is going to prompt the axe head to float, which reminded me of that period in Joseph's life where no matter how low he got, whether he was sold into slavery by his brothers or then locked up in the prison, it seemed that everything he touched was blessed. And then likewise, David, who was blessed everywhere he went in battle. And now we're seeing a similar thing with Elisha, who can turn a stick, some flour, and salt into a miracle. Reminded me of what my friend said. To any normal person, it's just salt, flour, and a stick. But to a man who's living at his potential with God, everything he was doing was blessed. For him, it took the shape of miracles. For David, Jacob, and Joseph, it was simply God blessing everything they would do, because each of these men were committed to being legitimate blessings to the people around them.